Have you ever watched a woman disappear without running? Not with sorrow, not with drama, but with grace. One day she was there. The woman who smiled through pain, who reached out first, who stayed even when her heart whispered, "Leave." And then, one morning, one breath, one blink too long, she was gone. Not physically, but energetically, emotionally, existentially. She no longer needed to explain her worth, no longer danced for crumbs, no longer begged to be noticed in the noise. She became the silence. And the silence became her sanctuary. They say she vanished into thin air, but the truth is, she dissolved into essence, into something that can't be captured, tamed, or claimed. She didn't vanish into absence. She returned to presence, the kind of presence that doesn't beg to be seen, but shifts the air when it enters the room. The kind of presence that no longer fits into the palm of someone else's approval. No, she doesn't beg anymore. She doesn't explain, overgive, or stay just to make someone else comfortable. She attracts, without trying, without forcing, without chasing. Because when a woman stops abandoning herself, the world starts to realign in her direction. She walked out of emotional contracts that were never sacred. She broke spells made of guilt. She cut the strings of invisible puppetry, expectations, roles, silent duties inherited across generations. Her retreat was not an escape, it was a remembering. And in that remembering, she became untouchable. Not because no one can reach her, but because no one can possess her anymore. She is no longer starving for attention. She is full of herself. Have you ever seen a woman so rooted in her truth that even her absence feels like a presence? A woman who listens more to her body than to advice. A woman who waits for her soul to say yes before saying anything to anyone else. That woman exists. She is not a myth. She walks slowly, breathes deeply, chooses intentionally, and when she smiles, you feel the silence between your ribs stir. You feel the weight of all your pretending crack open, because her peace exposes your restlessness. Her wholeness reflects the places in you still seeking. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." She made the unconscious conscious, piece by piece, shadow by shadow, wound by wound. She faced herself, in the mirror, in the night, in the memory of every time she said yes when her body screamed no. And slowly, she remembered her name. Not the name others gave her. Not the name tied to roles, mother, lover, friend, savior. Her true name, the one only the soul knows, the one written not in ink, but in silence. They call her different now, too strong, too sensitive, too distant. But that's only because she no longer fits inside their need for control. She no longer flinches at absence. She no longer mistakes silence for punishment. She no longer rushes to fill space just to avoid feeling. Because now she lives in the spaces. She breathes in the pauses. She blooms in solitude. And those who once kept her on the shelf now wonder why they can't find anyone like her. The truth, there is no one like her, because she doesn't belong to the past anymore. She belongs to the realm of the becoming, of the sacred, of the whole. And there, no one begs, no one begs, no one begs. Only what vibrates in truth arrives. Only what has done the work enters. Only what mirrors her depth gets to stay. This woman, this wild, quiet, radiant woman, she didn't disappear. She transmuted. She is the woman Jung spoke of in his deepest texts, the one who integrated shadow and light, and came back not with answers, but with presence, not with noise, but with knowing. She sits now, in the center of herself, in stillness, in wisdom, in mystery. And those who come too quickly, who come to consume, to tame, to distract, they will find a door closed gently, without bitterness, without hate, just clarity. Because once she found peace in silence, she could no longer survive in noise. And now she waits, not for a man, not for a savior, not for a grand gesture. She waits for the one who can feel her silence and not be afraid, the one who doesn't need her to shrink, the one who doesn't flinch when she says, "I don't beg," the one who has also crossed the fire of solitude, who has also walked through their own shadow, who doesn't mistake stillness for stagnation or mystery for avoidance. Until then, she doesn't chase, she doesn't ask, she doesn't beg, she attracts. Now, are you ready to know what she heard in the silence? Are you ready to hear the secret that made her untouchable? Because what happened between her and the silence is something no one was prepared to witness. And once you know, you'll never be able to go back to who you were. Theme: she doesn't beg. She attracts now, Carl Jung, and found peace in silence. It always begins in subtle ways. Not with screams, but with sighs. Not with breakdowns, but with silent disappointments that pile up like winter dust in forgotten corners. At first, she brushed it off. The birthday no one remembered. The conversation where her words were dismissed mid-sentence. The way they only called when they needed something. She told herself, "They're just busy. They mean well. It's okay. I'm strong." And she was. Strong enough to carry two lives at once. Strong enough to hold her grief in one hand and dinner for everyone else in the other. But strength, when misused, becomes a prison. She started to notice the fatigue, not in her body, but in her soul. A kind of quiet erosion, like the waves that gently kiss the rocks, until one day, the rock is gone. She didn't explode. She didn't cry out for help. She just got quiet. Not the kind of quiet that waits, the kind that has nothing left to say. Have you ever felt that? The ache of invisibility in a room full of people? The sting of being needed but never truly loved? The weight of carrying generations of silent women in your bones, each one whispering, "End this for us." She gave until her hands forgot how to be open. She smiled until her face forgot how to rest. She stayed, long after her spirit had packed its bags, because no one teaches women what to do with their own emptiness. They only teach us how to fill others. She was expected to endure, to be the bridge, the balm, the background music, to soothe anger without flinching, to absorb criticism with grace, to be a good woman, which so often meant being a quiet one. But silence used to be her cage. Now, it's her weapon. Because the silence she lives in now is not absence. It is memory. It is awareness. It is grief turned into clarity. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." She understands that now. Her pain is not a mistake. It's a map of every time she said yes with a trembling no in her throat. A map of every part of herself she sacrificed just to keep peace, in homes, in marriages, in friendships where her truth was too loud. She remembers the birthday she planned for someone who forgot hers, the love letters she wrote that were never answered, the dreams she shelved so someone else could feel safe, and worst of all, the years she spent trying to be lovable by becoming less of herself. That is a violence too quiet to name. She was never just a woman. She was a caretaker, a peacekeeper, an unpaid therapist, a mirror for everyone else's reflection, but never her own. And every time she tried to speak up, she was told, "You're too sensitive. Why are you always overthinking? You have a good life. What are you complaining about?" So she stopped explaining, stopped defending, stopped trying. But something in her kept whispering, kept burning. A voice too ancient to silence. It said, "You weren't born for this. You weren't meant to break just to be seen. You are not a well they can keep drawing from without ever giving back. And so began the slow revolt. Not with fire, with frost. She stopped picking up the phone, stopped answering with urgency, stopped rearranging herself to make others more comfortable, and for the first time in years, she sat, alone, with nothing but her own presence, and it terrified her, because beneath the silence lay the wreckage of who she once was. The girl who begged, the woman who waited, the soul who bent, and in the ruins was the question that shattered her. Why did I ever think I had to earn love? There was no immediate answer, only silence. But this time, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. It held her, not with words, but with truth. And in that stillness, she remembered the pain not as punishment, but as passage, a rite of purification. Carl Jung taught that the shadow holds what the ego cannot face, and in that quiet, she finally saw her shadow, the version of herself who gave everything away out of fear of being alone. And instead of turning away, she opened her arms and wept for the years, the betrayals, the abandonment she did not deserve, for the girl who wanted to be seen and only learned to disappear better. But as the tears fell, they didn't weaken her. They baptized her. She rose not broken, but reborn. More honest, more still, more unwilling to participate in her own erasure. Now, when someone asks too much, she doesn't fold. She doesn't smile to keep the peace. She looks them in the eye and says, no. Not with anger, but with finality. And they don't know what to do with that. Because they never expected the woman who always said yes to rise in silence and say, I'm done. Done being the rescuer. Done being the emotional crutch. Done being the one who stays when no one else would. She has chosen herself, not in theory, but in practice, in presence, in boundaries made of steel and soul. And those who still want her to perform the old script will find the theater empty, the curtain drawn, the lights dimmed, because the actress is gone. And in her place stands a woman who doesn't beg, who doesn't explain, who doesn't chase. She attracts, not by being loud, but by being whole. But what you've seen so far is just the beginning, because something deeper happened, something that changed not just how she sees others, but how she sees herself. What she discovered in the next phase wasn't just freedom. It was a revelation that unraveled the very foundation of what she believed about womanhood. And once she saw it, there was no going back. Are you ready to hear it? Because what comes next will dismantle everything you were taught to believe about love, silence, and the feminine soul. They said, "You're such a good mother." And she believed them, because no one told her that good in this world often means invisible, often means exhausted, often means available, no matter what it costs. She thought love meant giving everything. So she gave, until there was nothing left to give. Her sleep, her time, her body, her dreams, her name, all placed silently on the altar of family, all sacrificed without ceremony, all in exchange for the hope that she would one day be appreciated, not just needed. But appreciation never came, only more demands. She wasn't a person anymore. She was a bridge, a charger, a container, a woman who became structure instead of soul. And when her hands trembled, they said, "You're strong." When her eyes dimmed, they said, "You're tired, but that's motherhood." When her voice disappeared, they said, "You were always the quiet one." No one asked who she was beneath the role, not once. She loved her children, yes, fiercely. But somewhere along the way, she forgot how to love herself. Because no one showed her that you can mother without martyrdom, that you can give without vanishing, That being sacred doesn't mean being swallowed. The culture didn't teach that. The culture taught her that love is labor, that being a good woman means carrying generations on your back while smiling like you're flying. That rest is weakness, that boundaries are rebellion, that silence is golden, as long as it protects everyone else's comfort. She learned to apologize for asking, to whisper her needs, to make herself small in the name of family unity. And when she finally collapsed, they were shocked. They said, "But you never said anything." As if they hadn't ignored the signals for years, as if her burnout was sudden instead of cumulative. They told her to take a break, but they still called her every day. They still asked her to fix, solve, support. They still expected her to show up as the sun, even after they drained her sky. And for years, she said yes, not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know that no was an option, until her soul screamed louder than the guilt. Until she stood in the kitchen holding a plate that had fed everyone but her, and realized she had forgotten the taste of her own joy. Carl Jung said, "Nothing has a stronger influence than the unlived life of the parent on the child." And in that moment, she saw clearly. If she didn't stop this cycle, her children would inherit not just her love, but her depletion. They would learn that mothering means erasure, that devotion means silence, that love means losing yourself slowly. And she couldn't do it anymore. She wouldn't. So she did the most radical thing a woman in her position could do. She stepped back, not out of punishment, but out of preservation. She stopped answering right away, stopped saying yes before thinking, stopped measuring her worth in how useful she was. At first they were confused, then upset, then scared. Because when the giver stops giving, those who only know how to receive must face themselves. And that is a terrifying mirror. She heard them say, "You've changed. You're distant. You're not the same." And she wasn't. She was becoming. The woman they used to rely on was fading. And in her place emerged someone unrecognizable. A woman who no longer mothered out of guilt. A woman who loved with limits. A woman who said, "I am not your solution. I am my own soul." That didn't make her less of a mother. It made her more of a woman. And that shift unsettled the entire structure of the family. Because once the silent caretaker stops playing her part, the play collapses. The illusion dissolves. She no longer planned the holidays alone, no longer cleaned up emotional messes she didn't create, no longer kept the peace by destroying her own. And in the echoes of her absence, they began to realize she wasn't their background. She was the foundation. But she didn't wait for them to understand. She wasn't holding her breath for apologies. She was too busy reclaiming her life. Learning to sleep again, to walk alone again, to speak again, in a voice that trembled at first, but now sounds like thunder. She began to read books that had dust on them, to cook for pleasure, not pressure, to dance, not for an audience, but for herself. And in that quiet rebellion, she found something more valuable than validation. Peace. The kind that doesn't need permission. The kind that doesn't shrink to fit. The kind that holds her like no one ever did. Now, when she sees a woman doing too much, she doesn't judge. She recognizes. She sees the girl behind the apron, the tired goddess behind the mask of mother, the infinite soul behind the duty, and she wants to whisper, "You don't have to disappear to be loved. You don't have to carry everyone to be enough. You don't have to die a little each day to prove that you care." But she doesn't always say it out loud, because sometimes the most powerful invitation is presence, and her presence now says, "This is what it looks like when a woman chooses herself." But this liberation was not born in light. It was forged in shadow, in a place Jung called the personal unconscious, where all the forgotten parts of herself waited to be retrieved. And it was there, in the vast underworld of her psyche, that she encountered someone who had been waiting all along. A figure not of flesh, but of memory. Not a mother, not a wife. not a role, but an ancient version of herself, unfiltered, wild, awake. And what this forgotten self revealed to her is something few women ever dare to face. But once seen, it can never be unseen. There's a room inside every woman no one ever enters, not even her. A dim, quiet chamber where she locked away everything that was too much, too loud, too angry, too wild, too alive. She called it control. They called it maturity. But it was exile. That room was the shadow. Carl Jung wrote, "The shadow is everything you refuse to be." And she had refused a lot. She refused her rage because women weren't allowed to roar. She refused her desire because it was labeled shame. She refused her intuition because they told her logic mattered more. She refused her boundaries because she thought love meant saying yes. Piece by piece, she buried her fire beneath the smile, the patience, the "I'm fine." But fire does not die in darkness. It smolders. It waits. And one day, when her life became too quiet to drown it, the shadow knocked. Not with fury, but with truth. It whispered, "Do you remember who you were before the world told you who to be?" And in that question, everything began to tremble. She didn't want to look, because looking meant facing the woman she had betrayed, herself. But the silence had prepared her, and so she opened the door. Inside, she saw the things she had cast out to be lovable, the part of her that raged when disrespected, the part of her that wanted solitude without guilt, the part of her that could not, would not, shrink to fit, the part of her that didn't want to mother everyone. She saw the woman she became at 12, when she learned being agreeable kept her safe. The woman at 23, who said yes to things she hated, just to avoid disappointing others. The woman at 38, who cried in silence after family dinners because no one noticed how much she gave. And beneath all of them, she saw the root. A child, holding a note she had written in invisible ink. "I'll be good if you love me." She wept, not because she was broken, but because she was remembering. The shadow didn't come to shame her. It came to return her to herself, to say, "You are not wrong. You are not too much. You are not unworthy. You were just surviving. And now, you're allowed to live." In that room, she met her wildness. Not chaos, but clarity. Not recklessness, but raw power. She met her sacred anger, the kind that says no without guilt. She met her hunger, not just for connection, but for authenticity. She met her silence, not the kind that hides, but the kind that listens deeper than words. She realized the parts of her that were cast out were never wrong. They were simply inconvenient to a world that fears a woman who cannot be controlled. Carl Jung wrote, "The shadow is not evil. It is simply that which has not been brought to light." And so she brought it. To light, piece by piece, fear by fear, truth by truth. She stopped saying, "I'm fine." She started saying, "I'm full, and I need space." She stopped apologizing for needing rest, stopped laughing at jokes that hurt, stopped performing the quiet, sacrificial mother. She let the shadow speak. And what it said was this: "You were never too much. They were simply too unready. You were never wrong to want peace, but peace begins when you stop lying to yourself." And with that, she changed. Not suddenly, not loudly, but irreversibly. She no longer denied herself to make others more comfortable. She no longer buried her instincts to appear kind. She no longer hid her truth behind diplomacy. She became visible in her fullness, in her storms, in her intuition, in her needs. And that, more than anything, terrified the world. Because a woman who has met her shadow cannot be manipulated, she sees now, clearer than ever. And what she sees is that the world rewards the woman who forgets herself. But she has remembered. And memory, at this level, is power. But this was just the beginning, because what she was about to uncover was not just her shadow, but herself, the core, the truth beneath all masks, the original flame, and that truth was sacred and ancient, and wild in ways that no one, not even she, was prepared to fully understand. They didn't see it coming. They were used to her softness, her silence, her sweet nods and quiet rescues. They thought she'd always be there, always reachable, always reasonable, always erasing herself for the sake of peace. But peace built on suppression was never real peace. It was a cage. And one day, she woke up with fire in her lungs, not a burn of rage, a burn of truth. She didn't ask for space. She took it. She didn't explain why she was no longer answering calls that only drained her. She didn't send polite texts to those who never remembered her birthdays. She didn't justify her distance to those who only noticed her when they needed her. She disappeared and became visible. Because a woman who has remembered her power doesn't make announcements, she makes decisions. She no longer asks, "Am I being too much?" She asks, "Is this enough for me?" She doesn't wait for someone to finally see her worth. She walks away from anyone who refuses to, because now she knows the most dangerous thing a woman can do is return to herself fully. She stopped pouring into empty hands, stopped bleeding for people who never asked if she was still breathing, stopped softening her no so others wouldn't feel rejected. Now, her no is a full sentence, and her absence is louder than her presence used to be. She doesn't beg, she doesn't chase, she doesn't perform. She chooses, she commands, she claims. Carl Jung wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration." She has integrated it all now. The shadow, the silence, the rage, the radiance. She no longer separates the wild from the wise. She no longer sacrifices her intuition on the altar of others' comfort. And when someone dares to cross her boundaries, she doesn't flinch. She rises, with the dignity of 1,000 ancestors who were never allowed to speak, with the clarity of someone who has paid the price of betraying herself for too long. She's no longer afraid to be disliked, because now she understands. Being loved at the cost of your truth is not love, it's survival. And she didn't come here to survive. She came to live, to roar, to choose, to walk away when the energy is off, to protect her joy like a sacred flame, to stand still while others try to shake her and not move an inch. She no longer fills silences with small talk. She no longer waters dead things. She no longer accepts guilt as a language of love. She doesn't settle. She sets the tone. Her presence now says, "If you want access to me, bring depth, bring truth, bring effort. And if you don't, the door won't close loudly. It will never have opened at all. What they once called cold was her clarity. What they called distant was her discernment. What they couldn't manipulate was her alignment. She has become sacred ground. Not everyone gets to walk there. But what happened in that final silence, what she saw just before the fire returned to her eyes, is something few know. Something that changed not just how she walks, but the frequency of her very soul. And when you hear what she did next, you will understand why some women are no longer soft for the sake of survival, but sharp for the sake of sovereignty. Theme. She doesn't beg. She attracts now. Carl Jung, and found peace in silence. Tone. Poetic, symbolic, and affirmational. She has returned to herself, fully and fiercely. They said she changed, and they were right, but not in the way they think. She didn't harden, she clarified. She didn't close, she crowned herself. She walks through rooms now as if her silence is a song only the sacred can hear. No one taught her how to do this. She remembered. like a flame remembers its heat even after centuries of being dimmed. She walks slower now, not because she's unsure, but because she no longer chases. She listens longer, not because she's passive, but because her intuition speaks louder than their noise. She doesn't beg for space. She is space. She doesn't explain her boundaries. She embodies them. She doesn't decorate her no with softness or apology. It arrives like truth, unmistakable, clean, and whole. They ask her what changed. She answers without words. Her stillness speaks now. Her gaze is a mirror. Her breath carries centuries of silenced women. And every time she exhales, a chain breaks. She is not in hiding. She is in emergence. She is not cold. She is sovereign. She is not too much. She is finally undiluted. And for those who once tried to shrink her, she is now ungraspable. She no longer waits to be chosen. She chooses herself, again and again and again. She doesn't want a savior. She wants a witness, someone who can hold the fire without trying to control it, someone who doesn't fear her silence, but bows to its depth. She doesn't fear solitude. She walks with the invisible, and they protect her. Now, when someone enters her field, they feel it. The invitation, the standard, the quiet revolution in her presence. This is not performance. It's alignment. She no longer walks into rooms looking for acceptance. She is the room. She no longer softens her tone for those who flinch at honesty. She no longer tucks in her power so others can feel tall. She no longer shapeshifts. She no longer starves herself to be digestible. She feeds only on truth now, and drinks only from what nourishes. No more crumbs, no more waiting, no more apologies for the way her soul stretches beyond their comfort. She is not here to fit in. She is here to expand. She is not gone. She is arriving, fully, finally. She doesn't beg. She attracts. She doesn't flinch. She stands. She doesn't shrink. She remembers. And when she smiles now, there's something ancient in it, something untamed, something holy. Because what she found in the silence wasn't just herself. It was all of us. The women who forgot, the women who gave, the women who were told to stay small, stay soft, stay quiet. She is not alone. She is a flame among many, and this fire is spreading. But what comes next? What she's about to do now that she's whole is not just personal. It's collective. And when you see where her path is leading next, you'll understand why the world fears the woman who finally chooses herself. Maybe you didn't hear it at first, but something in you stirred. A pulse, a pull, a whisper too old to be from this life alone. Not everyone will understand what she became. Not everyone is ready. But if this message touched something you forgot was still alive inside you, then perhaps it wasn't just a story. Perhaps it was a mirror. And if it was, don't rush to explain it. Just sit with it. Let the silence speak back. Let your own soul finish what these words began. And when you're ready, say it quietly, just for yourself. I am not lost. I am remembering. If you feel this truth, share it with someone who needs to remember too. Leave your trace below. Let your presence be known, even if in whispers. And if something ancient awakened in you today, write the word intacta in the comments. That's how we'll find each other. Subscribe only if it feels like a return, not an escape. Only if your soul says yes. Only if something in you whispered, I know this voice, it's mine. Because when a woman chooses silence not to disappear, but to realign, she becomes untouchable and unforgettable.